Welcome to today's Seidokan Saturday. So I got a comment last week that I was saying karate when I wasn't. I was saying karate, And the commenter asked that I please respect the country of origin enough to pronounce it karate instead of karate or karate, which he thought I was saying. Karate, karate. Karate. Do we overpronounce it? How do you say it? Do you care? Do you want to become Kramer on Seinfeld and say, karate, Jerry, it's karate? And regarding language, how do we use our language in the dojo? Do we attempt the Japanese? Well, honestly, if I'm going to honor the country of origin, I'm not going to call it karate at all. I'm going to call it Toide or urunti or just ti for hand, because that was pre-Japanese. Okinawa and their Uchinanguchi, their indigenous language, their Hogen, the Ryukyuan Islands, spoke a language completely different than Japanese. So if I'm really going to honor the country of origin, I won't call it karate at all. I will call it Toide, which meant Tang dynasty hand, the China hand. So where do we draw the line on language? Well, I get annoyed at some terms. I get annoyed when people say bunkai instead of bunkai because it's bun, not bun. The a, e, I, o, u pronunciation of those letters, a, e, I, o, u, in almost every other foreign language is a, e, I, o, u, 100% of the time, never changes. Only in America do we have the uhs and some of those kinds of things. Now, I shouldn't say only in America. I'll get to that in a second. So, how purist do you want to be on the language? In your dojo, do you say front punch and reverse punch and high block and low block? Or do you use oisuki, gyakusuki, anyuke, gerambarai, uchiuke, sotouke, maigeri, yokogeri, mawashigeri? And there are different terms. Some people call a hook kick uramawashigeri. I call it kagigeri, hook, kick. Okay, mikazukigeri, ura mikazukigeri. Some people call mikazukigeri ura mawashigeri, and they call the hook kick ushiro mawashigeri. So where do you use the terms? I get annoyed when, so in the Seidokan school I went to, they tried to recite the dojo kun at the end of class in Japanese. And this is a whole class of gaijin with a couple of Filipino teachers. Some could pronounce it, some couldn't, but trying to recite it en masse in Japanese was a mess. They would have been far better off saying, I will always observe proper etiquette, I will always exercise self-control, etc., than to try to this bastardized, horrible Japanese. Watashi wa nihongo o skoshi nihongo o hanashimasu. I speak a little Japanese. Enough that when I go to Okinawan, Japan, I can say onegaishimasu, ohayo gozaimasu, dojo wa dochira desu ka, dochira ikimasu ka, where am I going, which way do I go to the dojo? So I can get by. Pero en español lo puedo hablar bien. In Spanish, I can speak it well. Lo hablo puramente. Fluente soy. I am fluent, but when I go to Taco Bell, I don't ask for burrito por favor, because I would lose that poor little kid behind the register. He'd have no clue what I'm talking about. Now, when I go to, I forget what the name of the place was that I went to in St. George, but when I go to a place that's run by Mexicans, yo voy a hablar en español, porque me entienden ahí. But I'm not going to do that in Taco Bell. So in the use of the language, if I only spoke Japanese terms to my class, okay, we're going to do oisuki, and some people call it oizuki, it's oisuki. If I only used the Japanese terms and didn't interpret them to English, translate it to English for them, they'd be lost. At what point do we change terminology? Ballet uses French, okay? They don't say high kick, they say fouette. They don't say spin around, they say pirouette. Now, some speak it better than others, but they use the terms of French for ballet, which is where it was derived. So there's a lot to be said for honoring the country of origin, but there's also something to be said for allowing for your audience and understanding and comprehension. Is it Kempo or Kenpo? Well, if you took the kana, the letters, the Japanese symbols, it's ken and ho. Why does it become po? Well, it changes. And then when you put the N in front of the P, kenpo, the M closes. So should I write it the way it sounds, or should I write it the way the characters are, in which case it would be ho and not po anyway? So how purist do we get on certain things? You can overpronounce. My son, who's fluent in Japanese and teaches and tutors it and writes it, understands the kanji, the whole bit, when he was with us in Japan, his comment on my first trip to Japan was that my Japanese sounded Spanish, which, I mean, I hablo español, but I didn't speak Japanese much. So, yeah, naturally it's going to come out a little Spanish. And so it was not wrong, it was just actually overpronounced. Well, even in Japan, some people overpronounce it. The young girls in the polite society, the geisha even, will say, for example, "Ohayo gozaimasu," but the at the end is not pronounced in Japanese generally. "Ohayo gozaimasu," and you don't even hear the at the end. Just like it's futon, not futon. If I told my American friends I sleep on a futon, and I eat sukiyaki for dinner, they'd be confused. But if I said I sleep on a futon and eat sukiyaki, they'd have an idea what I'm talking about. So how purist do we get on the language? How much do we allow? Do we criticize the Japanese for pronouncing milk, miruku? Because miruku is the lettering that they use to transliterate milk. They don't have the L, so it's mi-ru-ku, which are separate kana, hiragana. Hirakana turns into hiragana. So we learn to pronounce things as best we can. And the best Japanese transliteration of milk is mirukuru. The old Green Arrow show on TV had a Mirakuru they called it, because it was Mirakuru. They didn't say their R's the Japanese way. Oh no, I said karate instead of karate. I didn't harden up my consonants enough. Oh boy. They called it the Mirakuru. Well, that's just miracle with the hiragana, or the katakana, lettering. Miracle with katakana lettering is mirakuru. So they called it the Mirakuru drug on the TV show. Very poorly pronounced Japanese, but there you go. So in your dojo, do you use Japanese terms? How hard do you work at pronouncing them correctly? Is it Giran Berai or is it Geran Barai? Do you do Bunkai or do you do Bunkai? Do you do Age Uki or is it Age Uke? Is it Uki or Uke? Which are you making an attempt? No disrespect, Mike Holmes Sensei, I already kind of pointed this out, but he spells Kyoto, the city that used to be the capital of Japan, Kyoto. When he writes it Koyoto, like Toyota, but it's Kyoto without the O. Koyoto, it's Kyoto. Spelling the movie Daredevil, where Jennifer Garner says, "Yeah, I've studied with many. He had me study with many different sensei." Well, somebody probably heard the word sensei and thought the A was the letter they used to write it, and then said, but in Japanese, the A is pronounced A, and so then in the movie, they pronounce it sensei, instead of understanding that sensei is the correct pronunciation with the E. So how purist do you get with your language? Making a good-hearted, honest attempt is worth the effort. Being perfect is not in the cards for everybody. Being understood by the people to whom you are speaking is the most important. Now, in that sense, if we're honoring the country of origin, we don't use, for example, titles. I don't call myself Kyoshi or Hanshi, or I don't even call myself Sensei. When I introduce myself in Japanese, Shumaker desu, not Shumaker Sensei desu. That would be completely arrogant. Much less to use the teaching titles of Hanshi, Kyoshi, Shihan. Those are terms we use to refer to someone else. Chris Caggiano Sensei, he is 9th Dan. It would be accurate to call him Hanshi, but to his face, it would literally be almost mocking him to say Hanshi Caggiano. in terms of Japanese culture and etiquette. When I talk about him, totally appropriate to call him Kajiano Hanshi. When I talk to him, Kajiano Sensei. When he talks to me, if he calls himself Kajiano Sensei, that's considered egotistical. And so, again, if we're honoring the country of origin, it behooves us to try to use the terminology correctly and not disrespectfully or egotistically. So, that said, that's my diatribe for today. Thanks for joining. Hopefully it wasn't boring. I will get the TuiDi on that disappeared from my camera. I don't know what's going on with my SD card, but it didn't save it well. So I will get the TuiDi on. We'll go back to that next week, or maybe even later today. I'll get the adjunct of my Seidokan Saturday. Until then, as always, I hope I didn't bore you to death, and thank you for joining, but let's keep practicing.